Hey everybody, it's Chuck Johnson, editor-in-chief of GotNews.com. I'm here today to talk to you about how Twitter has gone full-on anti-white. Now, this is kind of a corollary of my larger thesis, the Johnson diversity dollar hypothesis, as friends have joked about it. What is the Johnson dollar diversity hypothesis? Well, in a world in which there are two goods, diversity and dollars, when you're CEO of a company and you're picking between the two of them, if you pick more diversity, you get less dollars, and if you pick more dollars, you get less diversity, because the way you make money is to have it being in accordance with human nature, be in accordance with actual market forces. The way you get more diversity is you purchase it at the expense of having more money. That's why you end up seeing blacks who have lower IQs getting into colleges, not being able to graduate in the same amount of time, going into the workforce, making less money on aggregate. And so that's really what's kind of going on there. Now, Jack Dorsey is a perfect example of this. Jack Dorsey is CEO of Twitter. He, by some measures, some people say this, I'm not necessarily reporting this, but I've definitely heard it in the tech community. He has a romantic relationship with DeRay McKesson, who you may remember is the guy who sort of started Black Lives Matter, was like one of the activists who co-opted it. And I had been doing research on him, and I put out a tweet saying if people want to join me in taking out DeRay McKesson, taking out, of course, being a metaphor, they can donate to my crowdfund. And I ended up raising some money from that, even though I was hit with a DDoS attack 4 times that day. And so nonetheless, and people tried to take away my PayPal account. Thanks, assholes. You didn't succeed. But that sort of like gives you some of the background here. DeRay McKesson, Jack Dorsey, these people are very close. They're very good at pushing this sort of anti-white agenda on Twitter's platform. Now, why do I say that? Well, Recode, Kara Swisher's publication, which was bought by Vox, Recode has reported that Jack Dorsey, CEO, part-time CEO, I guess, of Twitter, has been running around trying to get and diversify the board members who are on Twitter. In Twitter's case, they think that the more diverse the network they have, the more money they can wind up making, because they'll get different populations, they'll be able to sell them different ads, and so on and so forth. Of course, there's a larger problem with their business model, it being an open protocol, and how difficult it is to monetize an open protocol, because there's nothing that commands your attention in quite the same way that, say, a Super Bowl ad commands your attention, because you're waiting for the game to continue. There's sort of none of that on Twitter. There's just too much information being created at a faster clip. And so the value of those ads are really approaching zero, which is why most of the advertisers are actually moving towards platforms like Facebook, assuming they're going to advertise at all, because right now we're in the great stagnation, which is this process where we've gotten all the low-hanging fruit of technology. Tyler Cowen's written a great book about this. But essentially, we're becoming poorer. The difference between going from a horse and buggy world to one in which we're flying planes and trains, and you're getting on planes and trains and automobiles, that difference is sort of negligible at this stage. And so essentially we're becoming poorer. And so if we're becoming poorer, there'll be a lot more people on the internet. There'll be a lot more people consuming media. But the problem is that they're not necessarily going to have disposable cash to click on those ads to buy those things. And so that's why you see a lot of torrenting. That's why you see a lot. So that's kind of what's going on behind the scenes. If you want to get a sense of the future, just look at Japan now, or look at Korea now, and look at the ways in which people consume the internet there and the otaku culture in Japan. So anyways, I digress. Why is Twitter anti-white? Well, Twitter is anti-white because it treats its white conservative users and its white conservative female users very, very differently than it treats its black users. Don't believe me? Well, let's take the example of Azealia Banks. Now, Azealia Banks recently got into a contretemps, a fight with Sarah Palin, where she said some pretty, heinous, disgusting, fuck whitey, calling them crackers. This is basically how she talks to white people, and all of her her black fans like it. A lot of people A lot of people are digging it, but Twitter supposedly has this policy where they care if if you threaten another user, if you promote violence. That's arguably they've never given me a reason as to why I was kicked off of Twitter, but that's arguably why they kicked me off of Twitter. And so Azealia Banks, you can Google, it's Azealia Banks. Banks is in the thing that people steal from, or the place where you put your money, either one. Though whether the banks steal your money or not, I don't know. Anyways, Azealia Banks has gotten into this huge argument with Sarah Palin, and she has called for Sarah Palin to be brutally gang raped. She's called for her fans to go and steal Sarah Palin's hair in Alaska. A lot of black people in Alaska, no, not so much. So maybe Palin will be okay up there. Also, lots of people have guns, so just note to the Azealia Banks fans. But she has gotten into this big spat with Sarah Palin, and this is what she said according to the UK Daily Mail and Breitbart. Matthew Boyle wrote the story. Azealia, and I'm quoting her: "Forgive the Ebonics. Hooked on Phonics worked for me, so forgive me if I don't get the Ebonics diction properly done." So here we go. Sarah Palin needs to have her head shaved off to a buzz cut, get head fucked by a big, veiny, ashy, black dick, then be locked in a cupboard. So we have Banks calling for forced imprisonment, gang rape, and no problem there. No, see nothing here. There's no anti-white bias here. Azealia Banks is totally free to say this on Twitter. And even though Palin, even though a number of other people have filed a complaint with Twitter that she's that Azealia Banks is openly attacking this woman attacking Palin because she's white, because she's a woman, because she's a conservative. Twitter doesn't think it violates its terms of service. Okay. Moving on. This is another Banks tweet. "Hideous. At least suck a nigga dick or some before you start talking shit about black people willingly accepting slavery. Least she can do." I don't really know what Banks is talking about when it comes to talking about slavery there, but your guess is as good as mine. And then finally, this one's my favorite, personally. "Honestly, let's find the biggest, burliest black Negroes," props for alliteration there, Azealia, "and let them run a train on her being Palin, film it and put it on World Star." World Star, for those of you who don't know, is it's a particularly vicious, disgusting place where a lot of blacks advertise their cruelty to one another. It's the place where there was supposedly at one point a Trayvon Martin video where Martin had beaten a homeless person nearly to death. I'm told by George Zimmerman and by a few others that Sean Hannity tried to buy a copy of that video, but that video went missing right around the same time that some of the black activists, the Black Lives Matter organization, came into full swing and got a bunch of money that they used to shut a bunch of people up about the real Trayvon Martin. In any event, I digress. Now, you would think that this kind of violence, this kind of violent rhetoric, this kind of anti-woman rhetoric would violate Twitter's terms of service. And indeed it does, on even a casual reading of it. But, of course, Sarah Palin is white, and so there's a different standard there. Moving on, of course, you can see that the only people who have been punished by Twitter, short of a lawsuit, remember, they weren't shutting down ISIS accounts until somebody threatened to sue them. Somebody's family's been a victim of a terrorist attack. The only people who've been shut down on Twitter are white men. Milo Yiannopoulos has had his check mark taken away, which I warned him about. He didn't really take seriously, but nonetheless, he got his Twitter account. You had that taken away from him. He was briefly suspended for making a joke about BuzzFeed. I'm currently suspended on Facebook, by the way, for making a joke about Muslims and quoting Donald Trump, or paraphrasing, I think is technically the way I put it, about Muslims. And you've got Stacey McCain, who got into some arguments with a bunch of feminists on Twitter. Now, here's what's really going on. The left has built a bunch of properties on the internet, the social justice warrior left. And they built them and they got critical mass by promising people free speech. So people went on there and exercised their free speech and built these really amazing communities. You can see this in Reddit, you can see this in Twitter, you can see this in Facebook to a certain extent. You can see this all throughout the internet, where the social justice warriors offer free speech, and then the second the network becomes large and they want to get really big advertisers, what they do is they bait and switch. They say, well, we need to stop harassment. What is harassment? Harassment is whatever we say it is. Oh, okay. Just like obscenity is in the eye of the beholder, right? Oh no, we can't ban obscenity because we can't define it. But harassment we can define. Given the nature of how this conversation is going, and given the way in which things are going now, that what's happening is that there's a tension between the advertisers who want a safe space, so to speak, where they can hawk their wares to the public. You've got the advertisers on the one hand, you've got the user base which wants free speech to talk about ideas openly, and you've got the site that wants both parties to be happy. And of course, these things are moving in opposite directions. And the company Twitter itself is starting to struggle with this. Even though Jack Dorsey says that he wants diversity, the person he added today to the board is somebody who's never tweeted before, a guy named Hugh Johnston, who works for the CFO of, or who was the CFO of PepsiCo, that sugary drink company that probably should be illegal given how many Americans it's given diabetes to. It's certainly done more damage to Americans, I think, than the cigarette lobby or the tobacco lobby. But nonetheless, Americans are free to choose, and so they're free to consume their sugary drinks. And but it is revealing in a way that Twitter brings in a white guy who has a history of helping people sell and market to sell sugary drinks. I think it's quite revealing of how Twitter sees the future of its business, that there's no real confidence about free speech on the internet. It's no longer the free speech wing of the free speech party, as Dick Costolo once put it. It's no longer a utility where people can feel free to broadcast their views on the internet, as Jack Dorsey once advertised it when he was trying to sell to investors. So this is a company that's gone through many mutations. And right now, it's moving in a direction of censorship. It's moving in a direction of anti-white rhetoric and support. And it's moving in a direction where it favors the interests of its friends rather than the interests of its investors. And so that's where things are going. I have a position against Twitter. Not a big position, but I do have a position against it. When I was first suspended on Twitter, by the way, I was suspended. The stock price, I believe it was on. Let me go back and look at my chart here. The stock price on May 20th, which I think was the day I was suspended, was. No, excuse me. It was on May 22nd. It was $36.60, and today Twitter is $16.65. Now, at this rate, what should be done? What should we do about this? Should we fight this? I think we should fight it in the courts. So I am going to, at some point in the near future, file a lawsuit. If you're interested in this sort of thing, email me, editor at gotnews.com, if you're a lawyer and want to work on the case. We have a few pro bono lawyers working. I think we're also going to do a crowdfund at some point when we get WeSearcher up and running. And I think this is kind of where things are going. My basic sense right now is that unless we fight back against Silicon Valley fascism, and let's not kid ourselves, like it is a form of fascism. It's a form of trying to use government power, corporate power to force mores. So you see this in PayPal's decision to go after North Carolina for passing a religious freedom bill, while also, doing business in states that criminalize and execute homosexuals. You see this in the form of Twitter's chairman, Omid Korsakani. I don't know if I'm saying his name right. There's the Twitter chair has given some of the most money to DeRay McKesson's failed mayoral campaign. He's getting like 1% of the vote. And that's sort of where we see things going. I mean, that's where the conversation is going. And so my larger thesis, the dollar diversity hypothesis, is that the more a company signals that it's in favor of diversity, the less it's actually capable of building the future. Because as much as people don't want to acknowledge this, it's principally, unfortunately, I might add, because it would be great if the rest of the world could participate, but it's principally Northeast Asians, Ashkenazi Jews, and white men, by which we would say, Anglo-Saxons, or people of sort of Nordic ancestry, that drive a lot of the technological change and revolution in the world. And in an environment in which Silicon Valley is increasingly hostile to whites, that is going to be a real problem for generating the future growth that we need, especially as we are now entering a downturn, an economic downturn. So these are my thoughts on why Twitter's anti-white. And by the way, I think it's kind of funny that I forgot to mention this earlier, but I think it's funny. Hugh Johnston is like extremely white. He's never tweeted before. Apparently, Jack Dorsey wanted Oprah, yes, the Oprah, to be on the board. He also wanted Shonda Rhimes, who I think she's like some Hollywood producer or something. Shonda Rhimes, great. I think she's like somebody behind Grey's Anatomy. Anyway, she's here's a 46-year-old black woman, from lives in L.A. And you have Oprah, another kind of older black woman, and supposedly they're going to know the direction that Twitter should go in. I don't know. I'm going to call bullshit on that. Well, in any event, this podcast has gone on way too long. Email me, editor@gotnews.com. I'll be doing a few more of these in the near future, and it's going to be fun. I'm very excited to see where things are going.